So in this segment, we're going to be discussing another MP from Reform has suspended themselves. So this is over potentially dodgy COVID loans. We need to see how it plays out, the investigations and such. So let's have a listen.
So this story relates to James McMurdoch. He is the East Thurrock and Basildon MP, and he suspended himself after we contacted him on Thursday with a series of questions concerning allegations that he took out tens of thousands of pounds in COVID loans. He, in one company's case, used an entity that had been dormant and appears to have used that to obtain £20,000. There's another company.
So with these loans, like if you liquidate your company, there's no proof that it would have to be paid back. And with this stuff, because there was no oversight really with these loans, a lot of companies that got the loans didn't should not have gotten them. Gabriel Pogrund is quite a good journalist. He seems to be well sourced. Yeah, some of the stuff he posts is a bit dubious. He does work for a rag paper after all, so that's something worth remembering. But overall, this story seems pretty legit given the fact that they asked the MP about the accusations, James McMurdoch, and then he immediately suspended himself, which means something a bit dodgy is going on.
Of which he was the sole shareholder and director, which took out £50,000. If that had been a bounce back loan, one of the government-backed loans made available to medium-sized businesses over the course of the pandemic, that would require him to have had a turnover of at least £200,000. Now, we put to him that both these companies had negligible assets. It's not clear what business activity they were performing. Obviously, we always want to be exhaustive and fair, and so we gave him plenty of time to come back to us. Instead of giving any information, he went to Lee Anderson, the chief whip of that party, and asked for himself to be suspended pending an investigation. There's separate calls now from the Labour Party for the parliamentary authorities to examine the fact that he didn't disclose his directorship of one of these companies, not to get too into the weeds, but in one case he transferred the company to his mother. He does remain the director of one. He hasn't
With the way kind of companies are set up in the UK, it is quite opaque. You can Google some of this stuff. It would be on Companies House. So yeah, there's that, but it's quite fishy, honestly.
Disclose that on his register of interest,
and that's quite important, isn't it? If you work in politics, you have to declare these things.
You're supposed to declare these things. We've invited him to clarify if we've misinterpreted the rules, but response to that specific point, there came none. And the thing which is interesting as well is that both of these companies failed to file accounts. That's a criminal offence under the Companies Act, and they were due to be wound up. But then on the same day, the registrar, the company's regulator, received an objection from a third party, and that's as a result of which they've been banned from winding up. There's some sort of action.
So winding up, I think, means liquidation
taking place, which means that 2 years after they would otherwise have been dissolved, they still exist in legal form. So there's lots of questions and no answers so far from Reform.
So this is what you call like decent journalism, which is asking the person in question for a response. Evidently, he didn't give one, but ultimately it should have been registered. And the fact that Reform UK have barely done any background checks on a lot of their politicians is crazy. Like they got someone in who's a former Conservative MP, and I think they had to resign over saying the N word. So yeah, you got the dude who beat up his I think his ex-girlfriend as well, had a criminal charge for that. Whether you think someone can reform themselves, I guess, is the key question, because I think he said like it happened 20 years ago. It depends on your perspective on that. With that kind of thing, but domestic violence is not a mistake. Obviously, it's a crime. It's not a whoopsie. So it depends on what your perspective is. But that came out after the dude was elected. So with Reform, they don't do a lot of background checks, and it seems to keep biting them. Like apparently the councillors aren't turning up to meetings and such. So ultimately, like, this is another kind of problem for Farage, who keeps his circle, his group, pretty small, and only really gets incompetent people anyway, so that way he can remain the star player. because the truth is most of Reform are quite talentless. So you got Darren Grimes and those sorts of people, who are kind of elected politicians within the Reform Party. And despite what I think of Rupert Lowe and Ben Habibi, they are slicker operators than like a Darren Grimes, for example. So like Ben Habib can actually string a sentence together, and makes some sense when he speaks over Darren Grimes. So the bar is quite low. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.